Hi, welcome. And today I have the privilege of sitting down with one of the most interesting entrepreneurs I've ever met. She is a gamer, a nurse practitioner, a teacher, an innovator, and an academic leader. She's been referred to by colleagues as a unicorn and a dreamer. She herself would say she's a necessary disruptor. Her name is Dr. Leila Castile, and she's here today to talk about her latest project, SyncSim, which is the world's first virtual simulation center. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you must be very busy these days. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your own nursing career and your experiences, both with education and clinical practice?
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. I guess if you think about my history and education and nursing, they almost happened at the same time. I think I would have enjoyed being either and went to nursing school. I was a single mom of three young boys and needed a way to support them well. And at the time, I had also had some experience in a hospital setting and just felt like I was just in awe of the nurses and their work and the impact that they have on their patients. And so I went to nursing school and I graduated back in 1996. And almost within probably 30 days, it seems, I was asked to teach, I think maybe a CPR class or something. And then that led to teaching a CNA class or a nursing assistant class. And as I continued to grow in my own full-time nursing profession, I went back to school, completed my bachelor's degree. Then I started teaching in an associate's degree program. And as I was working on and completed my master's degree, I started teaching at the baccalaureate level. And just kind of as my career continued in nursing, my education career kind of just continued along with it. And I became a nurse practitioner in 2006, so almost to the date, I believe, 10 years later after becoming a nurse. And at that point was teaching part-time and working as a nurse practitioner in the emergency room full-time. And in July of 2008, I ended up adopting a newborn baby that was brought to the ER, who is, of course, now one of the loves of my life. He's now 15. But at that time, I realized that I kind of needed to change my schedule a little bit. My youngest son at the time was 18 years old, so quite a difference. Um, and that led me to work moving into higher education from an academic leadership perspective. So I became a dean of nursing at a small school and then sort of continued to grow from there. I helped launch new programs and new campuses for multiple big universities out there. But I also really fell in love with the idea of creating new ways to teach. Even back then, I was really interested in finding ways to make school more interesting and knowing that if it was more interesting and people enjoyed it more and they were more engaged in what we were doing, there's a higher likelihood that they would be connected to that in a way that would allow them to apply it to other things and of course, remember it. So I got into curriculum development as well at that point. So I would kind of go back and forth between practice full time and teaching or leadership part time. And then I'd flip and spend some time, which I've done for most of the last 10 years or so, working primarily in higher education academics, in leadership, but also I continue and have always continued to practice, usually in emergency settings or urgent care settings, which is what I continue to do now.
As a seasoned educator and academic leader, I'm sure you're aware of published studies and stakeholder feedback that indicate nursing graduates today are simply not prepared to practice. What are your thoughts on this? And how has this influenced your work to create solutions to this problem?
That is probably, that's such a great question and probably at the heart of so many things that drive me right now. I've always felt that there was something about the way that we were teaching. We've done it the same way for so long, and we've flipped classrooms and we've added some technology, but we still really rely so heavily on high stakes testing. There's not a lot of formative assessment. It's a lot of information for nursing students to get, and at the end of the day, they may be able to pass an NCLEX exam, which asks them about a lot of things that they know, but then they get out there and it's very difficult to apply that unless you've had practice. And it just seems that we've become less able to prepare these new grads for actual practice, to think for themselves, to take pieces of information they've learned and somehow apply that to a completely new situation and do it rather quickly. I mean, as we know, healthcare moves fast. Decisions need to be made quickly. They're very important, sometimes life-saving decisions. So there's a lot of pressure on a new nurse, and if you add to that the fact that they've been able to acquire a lot of knowledge, but possibly not been able to figure out exactly how to think through on their own the knowledge that they've learned, well, then they really are handicapped to be successful. And the story I always tell people that I think is really important when you look at the studies that have gone on for the last 15 years, 20 years, where the NCSBN has identified, hey, nurses that are coming out of school simply aren't able, they can't critically think like they used to. And we all kind of scratch our heads and we say, well, it's because the patients are sicker. And that is true. But at the end of the day, there's still some basic thinking and thought processes that need to occur. And it seems that we've gotten worse at helping to develop that. And there was a moment where it was like a light bulb thing for me, a lightning bolt, I guess, where I remembered that when I was in nursing school, we would be required to go to our clinical site the night before our clinical. So we would get our patient assignments a day in advance. We would go to the facility in our uniforms with our badge, all by ourselves. We would be given access to the patient chart, and we would spend hours sitting there going through and capturing the history of that patient, their diagnostic results, their lab results. Were there any consults? What was expected for them in the next few days? What was the plan? We'd look at all their comorbidities and the medications that they were on. And then we would go home and we would spend an additional number of hours researching all of those things on our own, not in the context of a classroom where someone's teaching it to us, but within the context of putting this puzzle together and having to think through not only what does all this mean, how is it connected, but what does it mean for my care for that person tomorrow? So we got this great window into something where we had some space on our own to look up a diagnostic result, for instance, and start to discover, well, what is that test used for? What do these results mean? Why might they look like they do? So there was a lot of self-discovery. Nobody was feeding this to us. We had to sit there and sort through it. And maybe we did come the next day to clinical with more questions than we had answers, but we had the questions, and that was what was so vital. We had things that we wanted to know. And more importantly, we walked in that day with an idea, a hypothesis about what we expected to find, what we expected to do, what we thought the orders would be, how we would need to prioritize our care. And we got to do this over and over and over again throughout our, 2 to 4 year nursing program. And I tell that story and I get the look, always, well, obviously we can't do that anymore, right? We can't, nobody's going to let you in the day before without your instructor, and they're not going to give you access to private records. And on top of all of that, how on earth could we possibly assign patients the night before? Patients don't stay as long as they used to. Forget about caring for the same patient twice in a row, especially if you're only going once a week, for instance, to a clinical site. So we just simply don't have that mechanism in place anymore in a live clinical environment. What happens now is students go in, they're going to get their assignment that morning. usually the instructor themselves, they haven't even had a chance to really investigate those patients. Everyone's doing the best they can to make it work. The staff is busy. The hospitals are understaffed already, so we can't be a burden to them in this process. So you get your patient assignment, you have a short period of time to do a little bit of investigation, but they want you on the floor, they want you working, and you do learn, right? I mean, you watch nurses, you listen to them, and a really great staff nurse is going to take the time to explain everything they're doing and why. And a really great instructor is going to remember that Socratic questioning. They're going to sit there and ask you why versus just telling you. But it is a lot of mimic behavior. And even if you're getting that extra instruction and that understanding during the process, it is very different to be learning about something as you're trying to do it than the process that I spoke about before, where you had the chance in a nice, free space, a safe space to think it through and to ask a few questions before you began your care. So I've always believed, since I had that sort of epiphany, that that is one of the biggest influencers in what's now become of nurses graduating and not being able to think. And we do see the next gen NCLEX. So the NCLEX folks are doing their best to address that by asking harder questions, asking different types of questions, getting back to the heart of how nurses think and their judgment and their prioritization. But if we're not giving them the opportunity to learn that way, it's going to be very difficult for them to test out that way, and even more difficult to feel competent and confident when they go out into the care areas. So that kind of ends up being at the heart of what SyncSim is about and what we're trying to create. And that is going back, old school in the 90s, how it worked. It's our little throwback experience where, because we can anticipate the experience that the students will have, and we can provide robust charts and lots of information to them before they, walk into that virtual clinical, they're given that opportunity again to experience what I haven't seen in higher education in decades. So that's kind of at the heart of what we're trying to recreate, and of course, why I believe it matters so much.
You have often mentioned game-based learning when speaking or writing about higher education and learning in general. Why has gaming had such an influence in your life? And what significance do you think games have in the areas of clinical practice and education?
I will try to contain my excitement. This is my favorite question, something I always light up when I talk about, but I will do my best to keep it simple. So, in addition to being a nurse and nurse practitioner and educator for almost 30 years total in all, I am also an avid gamer. So, I've played predominantly computer PC based games. But when I say games, I was somebody that even as a kid, I loved card games and Scrabble and puzzles and things like that. So games are not obviously just digital, but I've always had an interest in playing. I had the opportunity at a very young age. I had a family member that was really into computers back when, nobody had computers. And so I had exposure to that very young. And so as I got older, it just was always a part of what I enjoyed doing in my spare time. And then I had boys. I had three boys, but kind of back to back. And when I became a single parent, I found that video games became something we could do together. So for me, it was a connection. It was a way to spend time with people that I cared about. And anyone who has teenage boys understands that sometimes it's not always easy to relate to them. And this was something we could do together. And interestingly enough, even after they started to go off and head to college, we would continue to play. And to this day, when we can, we do try to log in and play. I was a beta tester for a game called World of Warcraft back in 2004, and have played ever since on and off over the years. And that's an online MMORPG, or it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And so it's extremely immersive. And as I continued in my work in education, I was always just sort of fascinated by the idea of what those types of experiences brought to me personally in terms of fulfillment and excitement and motivation compared to maybe what it felt like to go to work or accomplish a task or even do something really well at work. There was just this disconnect between the intrinsic motivation to do things. And so I was attending some gaming conventions. I became really interested in game-based mechanics. I started following somebody named Jane McGonigal, who is still kind of one of my heroes. She's done some fabulous work at creating and using games to solve real-world problems and including health-based problems. And I started reading a lot and studying and going to conferences and looking at the research, and it really is fascinating. And if you sit and think about it for a minute, is whether you play games or you don't, or whatever you may think about game players, there's something to be said for a person that would, you know, go to work 40 hours a week, getting paid to do that work, and during that time, definitely have periods where they accomplish great things. Um, and then they come home and they spend another 40 hours paying to do something that has no real world value. And yet, likely if you asked them about the difference and how those things made them feel, they feel far more motivated to do the thing that they're doing at home that they're not getting paid for. And we could say it's because it's fun. There's lots of, reasons for that. Although I would also say that work does not have to be not fun, right? Work can be fun. School can be fun. School can be interesting and engaging and challenging in the right way. But at the heart of game-based thinking, so it's not just gamification, that word always kind of bothers me. It's not just badges and scoreboards. It's the idea of looking at what is it about games that motivates people so much. And in order to understand that, you have to go to the gaming industry and think about what they're doing. And I will tell you, having spent some time in the offices of some of the biggest players in the game industry, their staff typically includes a large number of psychology PhD folks that are specifically studying motivation or have done research on motivation. And that makes sense, right? Like, who else, what other industry relies so heavily on its customers' motivation than a game developer, because it's something we don't have to live, and yet people are playing by the millions around the globe. So in essence, some of the most important things that apply to what we're talking about now are things like a compelling narrative. There's a lot of research out there that indicates that anytime you tie something to a story that's compelling, that our brains process that information very differently. It moves into long-term memory more quickly. We have an emotional attachment to that information. So it becomes something that's more valuable to us and meaningful, and we hold on to it longer. So a compelling narrative is extremely important whenever we're teaching our students. And what more compelling narrative do you have than a family member who's ill? The story of someone who's has a problem in their health, that should be compelling, and we can make sure that they're hearing that. And then you have the freedom to fail, which is very, very different than what you see on the school side, where you have these high-stake exams and everything's super serious, and if you don't get it, then you're dropped from a class. In a game, you always have the opportunity to stop, go back, reflect, try it again. I mean, come on, let's all, who hasn't played Angry Birds? How many times we would try that over and over and over again. And we were actually learning physics, but we were continuing to do it because we were determined to get it right. And at the end of that, our reward for getting it right was a harder challenge. That's at the heart of games, which is even more interesting to me because think about that in your real life and your work. If every time you did something great, your reward was something that was harder, you probably wouldn't be very happy at work. But in the game space, it works. And those are some examples. There's a whole list of gaming mechanics that, when applied well into a work environment, or in this case, a school environment, can have tremendous impact on our students. So, when we developed these cases and these experiences and our platform for SyncSem, this was very much a part of what we were intentionally including and thinking about as we built out these experiences. We want our students to be talking about these experiences at the dinner table. We want them to have that much of an impact on their feelings, their thoughts, so that it stays with them. And if they see something similar in the future, they can reapply that information in a meaningful way in their career. And I've spent a lot of time building video games for nursing students and other college students. I'm not a coder, but I've worked with great teams that have been focused on building, and I've seen firsthand the results of this type of modality and focus when you are teaching nursing students. So I said I wasn't going to get long-winded, and I did anyway, but this is probably at the heart of so much of what we do and why SyncSem exists.
So tell me, are you playing any good games these days?
I guess the best answer to that question is I wish. I really don't have the time that I used to. Hopefully, in the future, I will. I keep everything up to date and always get the latest of my favorites just so I've got them available in the event I ever do get some free time. But still have World of Warcraft installed, although it's been quite some time. And then the latest, probably before life got so crazy, was actually Call of Duty, which completely surprised me. I am not a first person shooter kind of girl, but again, it just came back to connecting with family and folks who were playing those things and wanted me to join. And so that game is in cross platform. And what that means is I can play on the computer while someone else plays on a console. So yeah, those are sort of it. But it's been a minute, and likely we'll have to wait some more. But I will find that fun and all the reward and the motivation that I've been talking about in this work that we're doing, because it's so exciting what we're working on with SyncSem. So I will take that for now.
In all seriousness, it's clear you have a lot of experience, both in the patient care arena and in nursing education. When did all of this merge into a desire to create a simulation experience? And how did you initially go about doing so?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it kind of has two sides to it. So I would say that for a very long time, for decades, I have always wanted to find a way to work on a project to recreate sort of the experience that I had in World of Warcraft in an immersive 3D environment for not only nursing students, but for all of the other health professions and really any profession, if you think about it. So if you imagine this online world where everyone's doing the jobs that they're learning how to do, and they're doing it within the context of working together, just like they would in a real in a live environment. And so that's been something I've blogged about, I've written about. I put out a kind of embarrassing 2011 World of Warcraft video where I kind of contemplated what that might look like. And none of those things really went anywhere. It was very difficult to get folks to understand what I was trying to do. However, I think where this truly came together was like it did for many people when COVID hit. I was in a role where I was responsible for, we were actually in the middle of creating a new undergraduate nursing curriculum kind of from scratch, which is a very exciting, wonderful project to work on. And ironically, had already made the decision to include some vendor products that were virtual simulation products. And so that decision was made before COVID hit. However, when, we all remember March and April of 2020, it became, vitally important that we come up with a solution quickly. We were trying so hard to keep our students progressing in their programs, and the clinical sites were shut down, the labs on campus were shut down. So my role at the time became just larger than life. And because we already had made a decision to work within these products and to use these products, it was really just a matter of ramping up how we were using them. So, like many other schools across the country, we were giving students opportunities to complete what you would say, I guess, would be virtual clinical or software based or computer based clinical experiences. And, I have nothing but love for those products. I don't think I'm allowed to endorse them here, but I will say that I still to this day, I mean, the products that we worked with were amazing and are still amazing and absolutely have a great place in nursing curriculum. But what we found was, we came up with a plan, a master plan to make sure that we were using all of these products effectively in the right places, that they were aligned with learning objectives. We did everything we thought possible to ensure that student learning could continue as closely to how it would have continued if they were able to go out to the clinical environment. And at the time, I worked for a university that had campuses all over the country. So standardization of that process was very difficult. And we learned quickly that there was a lot of variability in how those experiences were being provided for students. So in some cases, they were simply assigned and students would do them off on their own. And then maybe the instructor would talk to them about it when it was over. And then that we definitely had examples where faculty did a lot of extra. They spent a lot more time. They either went through these with the students in groups or one-on-one, and they did some debriefing, so there was just a lot of difference in the way that these products were being used. And so, of course, ultimately that meant there was a broad range of feedback from students, student experiences. Some hated it, some enjoyed it, and a very difficult time tracking the success of this. How was it impacting learning? How did we know that they were getting what they should be getting out of these experiences? And then just the way I'm wired, I would always look at the products and I would say, okay, this is great. We've got this great patient case, but it's only focused on this skill and maybe this medication. I'm looking at this case and I'm thinking about 10 other medications and a whole bunch of other things that would inherently be part of caring for this computerized patient. So myself and my team started to do just that. We started to build scenarios around the software patients that we were already using. And we created these live, synchronous, ongoing experiences where you would have the benefit of having this digital patient to use as an example, but you would not lose all of the interactivity. So we also had patient actors playing the patients, and we had live faculty present, and it was very engaging, and the feedback was just phenomenal. So we realized, okay, we're on to something. And this was the closest I'd ever come to creating something that I had been talking about, since 2010 or so. And it wasn't fully what I wanted, but it was close. And witnessing the experience through the eyes of the students and hearing their feedback and realizing that they really were learning things that mattered and were aligned with what was happening in the classroom. That felt really good, and that sort of stuck with me. And so that's kind of how all of this came together. There were limitations within that environment and limitations, when trying to use a third party vendor product. And so I had been talking for a number of years about, what we really need is an online version of a simulation center that you might see in a busy city or in a hospital. We've got to find a way to bring people together regardless of where they are or what their limitations might be. We want to get people together in this online remotely delivered experience. We've proven that it works. We've proven that if we develop it in a way that is interactive and live and synchronous, and we have all of these real people involved, that it really does work. So that's what we need. And the funny part about that is I tried desperately to give this idea away. I will just say that for the record. I was busy in my own career and my family, and I was, obviously still practicing and working in education, and I didn't have time, and I'd never really started a business, and I just kept thinking I would tell somebody about this and they would create it and then maybe hire me to consult or help. And I had been having that conversation for years. And this past year, I just, all of a sudden, it was just one of those, moments that you don't ever forget in life where I had a dear friend sort of say, well, I guess maybe you need to do it. And that's where SyncSim was born. So it was coming for over a decade, maybe 2 decades, if you really look at some of the things that drove me to this. But that's it was during that 2020 time where more than anything, I think I realized the need. I always knew this was something I wanted to do. And I kept thinking if I met the right software people or the right company or the right something, that I could make it happen one day. But that was just because I had this inkling or this desire to do it. But I think COVID really cemented for me, and the response that we received from what we were trying to put together, that this is a necessary thing. This is something that didn't exist before and really needed to exist in order to support the kind of learning that students need right now to prepare for practice. So um, I wouldn't say kicking and screaming when I started. I'm definitely not doing that now. I'm very, very, very excited. But yeah, that's kind of the journey of how it all ended up coming together.
Listening to your story, it really does seem like you've been headed to this professional and personal juncture for quite some time. Now that you're here, tell us about some of the biggest challenges you've faced while trying to introduce innovative strategies into the classroom.
I think in terms of challenges, it's interesting. If you look at individuals, I can say that I don't recall ever working in any of my roles in nursing education where there wasn't at least a person or a few people that were like-minded, so I would never stand here and say, I'm the only person that was interested in doing cool things or trying new things. There were usually others, scattered around that had the same ideas and often better ideas, frankly, than I had. And for the most part, they were implementing those within the context of their individual classrooms. So there's always been innovation happening, but as you kind of look at the bigger picture at an institutional level and you're trying to get people to buy in to innovative strategies that perhaps conflict with or would replace existing traditional strategies. It's tough. Nursing is, it's nursing education is built around tradition and is a really tough nut to crack. So again, you find the individuals and you pair up and you work together. But what you really need is change at a much broader level. And I think that's what the challenge has been. And, it's funny now, but probably 10 years ago when I would start to um, tell people about some of the ideas that I had, let me premise this by saying, honestly, there were many years as I got into higher education, especially in leadership positions, where I didn't tell anyone I played video games. I was actually kind of embarrassed by that. I felt like I was a little bit of an outcast in that regard, being, a campus president or a dean of a nursing school, but, going home and playing World of Warcraft, that just didn't seem to connect well. So I didn't talk about it. And it took a while for me to feel comfortable enough in my own skin to even admit, that this was something I enjoyed doing. And I came to that ability really just because it just kept pressing on me the idea that we were losing these opportunities to really maximize what the gaming industry could teach us in order to get students that loved to come to class, that couldn't wait to get the next assignment. I mean, imagine what that might look like. And that's exactly what I was trying to do. So I will say that I can distinctly remember having a conversation with someone that was pretty high up in my organization. This was many years ago, and had launched and was running a nursing program at a new campus. And I had just been pitching all of these ideas and finally had this well-respected, someone I truly admired, sit down with me and just say, Leela, I just really think you need to focus on your campus right now. This stuff's a little out there, and so that occurred a lot. There were a lot of presentations I gave where at the end of my presentation, if it had been on something related to gaming mechanics or some of the things that I've been wanting to do all these years, I would finish those presentations and then look around the room at these highly educated nursing leaders in their suits. They were my peers, but they all looked at me like they had no idea what I was talking about. So it just and I wouldn't say I was ahead of my time. I would just say that I did represent kind of the unicorn in the bunch from the perspective that I had had this lifelong journey with gaming and now was really involved in education and had always tried to feel the need to put those two things together. And then ultimately in simulation, which some experts will say simulation and gaming are the same. In some respects, they are. That's probably a conversation for another day. But honestly, the challenges really come back to getting those that have to invest to agree to buy in, because it's not free. And the crazier the idea is, probably the more expensive it's going to be. And I think that's still where I'm living. I'll just put the message out, Elon, if you're listening, let's chat. I have some really big ideas that I would love to explore. They just need a little bit of cash. So, but yeah, the challenges are the finance, the expense, and the risk. I honestly think it's very difficult for those in higher education, especially when you're talking about programs that prepare people for licensure, and that licensure is a requirement to work. It puts a tremendous burden on the schools to keep it slow and steady, and major changes represent a huge risk. And so I think that's another reason why I had to just sort of start SyncSim separate. It has to be its own living thing so that I can take the risk for the schools. I can demonstrate the value and they can tap into it without having to take the risk themselves. So, yeah, it's been hard. I have been called crazy. But maybe I am a little crazy, but it got us here, and I just can't wait for the world to see what SyncSim can do for our nursing students.
It's very clear when speaking with you just how passionate you are about your work. It must have taken an enormous amount of patience waiting for others to share your vision and always needing to ask permission before trying something new. Can you speak a little bit about what that was like?
I definitely think that patience was part of it. I mean, obviously it's taken almost, 20, 25 years to get here, but it's a little broader than that. It's, it takes a little bit of thick skin to put some ideas out there and have them sort of unilaterally dismissed. Even getting to the point where I could talk about these ideas and what I wanted to do. That took some time because, you know, if you work in creative fields, coming up with great creative ideas is a part of the gig, and everyone talks about it, and it's highly celebrated. But when you work in a very highly professional, regulated area, it can be very hard to get people to hear you or to even have the guts, frankly, to talk about anything that sounds a little different than how we've always done it. So I think it was patience combined with just a lot of I don't know what. I think I always knew that this needed to happen and that at some point, hopefully in my lifetime or in my career, it would. And then, you know what? I kind of just decided at some point if it doesn't happen when I'm, here making a difference, then hopefully I've talked about it to enough people that somebody else would take it forward. I will say, though, speaking about the idea of asking permission, I think that above anything else is the best part of where we are now, in that I really have been in a position for the entirety of my career at needing the permission or the approval of others to move forward with things that I really truly believed were going to revolutionize nursing education. And that disruption and that need for change, not everybody has the constants for that. It's not easy for everybody to manage. Change is very difficult. And so I think that's really the biggest advantage now, having your own company. I never thought in a million years that that would be what I would do, but at least in this space, I really don't have to ask permission other than from my wonderful partners, which I'm happy to do so because we're all like-minded and headed in the same direction. So, yeah, it took a lot to not give up. And many, many times I did. I kind of went back into that rote memorization of do your job, do what you're told to do, get the work done. But this has just been such a huge nagging feeling that I've had for a very long time, and we're not done. What we're putting out there now is still nowhere near the crazy that I feel like we can get to. So more to come for sure.
Clearly, you are a big fan of all things technology, and specifically clinical simulation. Some will say that simulation and artificial intelligence will ultimately replace live clinical experiences as we know them today. In your opinion, should they replace those experiences?
God, I hope not. Honestly, the purpose of what we provide at SyncSim is not to eliminate facility-based clinical experiences altogether. Those have such a powerful impact on students and absolutely need to be a huge part of their clinical experience while in school. I mean, in fact, we aren't even looking to replace sim lab experiences, which utilize mannequins or even software products available in the market today. We'd like to introduce a strategic method of providing students with the very best that each of these experiences has to offer. Software-based products are phenomenal at introducing patients and allow independent discovery and decision making that's aligned to classroom content. Often they're brought into the classroom. They're great tools for helping students develop clinical judgment. The Sim Lab, of course, is also just an excellent place to work as a team. So, when you have the high fidelity mannequins and you're working together in groups and you have such great pre-brief and debrief opportunities, that's where students begin to disassemble all of the complexities of the nursing role and get to work together as a team. We also, I don't want to forget that it's in those lab settings that faculty can start to identify learning gaps and provide some real time remediation. So, it's very important, I think, that anyone listening, especially if you're working for or with any of the other products or the other experiences, I truly, truly see SyncSim. I do see it as being important, vital, necessary, even in the journey of a nursing student. But I see it within the context of this big puzzle, and that includes all of these other solutions that have their own way of assisting students, and we're all here to get to the same goal. So I absolutely see a purpose for everybody. For as far as AI specifically, that's probably, a conversation for an entirely other podcast. AI and I have a very kind of a love-hate relationship. But I do want to just point out, I mean, it is new. Well, it's not, but in terms of this general mass usage, it absolutely is relatively new. But we need to consider that anything that's grounded in something artificial is likely going to come with a few shortcomings. So I think that's just more of a word of caution as we start to figure out how AI will best fit into the way that we teach and the way that students provide responses to what we're teaching.
So, with all that being said, where do you see SyncSim fitting into an overall nursing student experience? And why should someone partner with your company?
I never thought you'd ask. No, it's pitch time, right? This is where I get to kind of sell the product. And it's actually not, I don't think of it as a product. First of all, it really is an experience. I believe that there are software products that are, screen-based products that were originally designed to be ancillary material for classroom instruction. I don't know that pre-COVID there was this idea that we would replace clinical hours in the facility or in a sim lab with a software product. It just sort of happened when COVID came along. And I think that just like we did, I think a lot of other people found ways to make it work. So I believe that the various software screen-based products have a very significant role in classroom instruction and in work that students do individually or as a group alongside their classroom instruction. I'm not completely sold on the idea that they should have clinical hours for that time. That's just me, just based on working with these for so long. But that shouldn't just be the goal, right? It's not just about getting the hours. It's about helping your students learn, and those products are fantastic at doing that. And then you have the VR, the headset things that are coming out. Many companies are putting those out, and those are also called virtual because it's virtual reality or those experiences are also really good additions to the classroom. Maybe a little more fidelity here, and in some of the better products, they've woven in time in between headset time where the students and the faculty can kind of work together. So I see that a little bit more getting into sort of the high fidelity sim on campus lab space. I see those two things being very similar. But again, just as my own critique and having worked with all of these products, the one limitation that we currently find in those experiences is they are still single individual experiences where you may have multiple patients, but it's still kind of difficult to engage with other people at the same time. But again, I will say great products. I've worked with several of them. I have a favorite, but I can't say here. But yes, so there's some great things going on in the headset and the VR space. And then you have your high fidelity simulation labs, which we have been around for quite some time. You've got mannequins that can sweat and blink their eyes and bleed, and can go into all kinds of different heart rhythms. And that's kind of getting closer to this idea of having faculty and students all together working on a common goal in a space that can be recorded, where you can have review of that experience and some really good debriefing afterwards and that remediation. And so that's kind of the gamut of what's available outside of live clinical experiences in a facility, which are always going to be the end game. We have to have that time to go into a real world environment and interact with real people. Getting into personal space is very difficult. You need to do that before you graduate. Having those conversations, learning how the hospital system functions, the charting and all of those things. That is the highest end that you can get to. So where I see SyncSim fitting, to be honest, is I think it provides, because it is remotely delivered, it's not just about being convenient. It also provides a little more anonymity for the participant. So in a sim lab, you've got cameras and people watching you. It's a little higher level of anxiety. So I kind of see these experiences working in conjunction with those lab experiences. I do see what we offer as high fidelity based on the definition in terms of just how complex and how real our experiences are. We have live patients, we have live faculty, peer-to-peer interactions and engagement, multiple patients in all of our scenarios. So it is very realistic, and I do feel confident in the fact that clinical time associated with these experiences is appropriate. And I think that this kind of becomes that thing that students do right before they're going out and doing it in a live clinical environment. I think that's, if I had to sort of explain that timeline or how everything fits together, that's the best way that I could think of to explain it. In terms of why someone should partner with us, I think it's just, we have a wide catalog. We cover everything from fundamentals of nursing all the way through to critical care. So we have the specialties: mental health, OB, maternal newborn, community health. We have critical care, and like I said, kind of everything in between. We have a variety of settings. We have live patients. We have live faculty that have been credentialed for you, that are licensed in your state. So we take care of all of the paperwork and the hiring and onboarding and training. We provide actually pretty thorough performance feedback to our clients. So afterwards, they'll get an individual report for every single student and get to see how they did and use that as a tool as they're going forward in their program. And it's easy. I mean, it really, when you think about how complicated clinical scheduling is, it is a challenge. It's expensive and it's very time consuming, and clinical capacity is a huge issue for schools. So we help to solve that problem by really expanding your clinical capacity in a way that's very simple for the school. They can go online, they can look at the calendar, or they can look at the catalog, and in either way they can pick the right event that is aligned with their program and their course, and pick a date that works for them and schedule a bunch of students at one time. So we provide that convenience. All of our experiences are aligned with the NCLEX, our test plan, the 2023, or the next gen, as people will refer to it. And all of our experiences are developed within the kind of looking at the norms of international and national simulation standards. So we've worked very hard with some simulationists and experts to put these together. So I think that's my spiel. That's why I think people should do it. But I think obviously I'm a little biased. But having experienced this at a much smaller level, I think I'm just very excited to share this with the world, and also to move forward with some other exciting things we have planned for the future.
From what I've seen so far, I have no doubts that SyncSim will be successful, and the potential impact of what you are doing really is extraordinary. Any last words for our listeners?
Well, I mean, as usual, I probably used way more words than were necessary to talk about all of this, so I'll try to keep this brief. I definitely think if you're looking to give your students something extraordinary, something beyond what they've ever experienced before, you should check us out. Feel free to reach out. We absolutely are here to truly make a difference. We want to see that what we're doing is going to have the impact that those late night visits to the hospital had for me back in the 90s. That is my ultimate hope for these students. And, for those that are out there that have ideas, that are creative, that are thinking about ways to change education, don't stop. It is not just about the patience and the perseverance. It really is hard sometimes to be creative and move forward when the world sort of tells you that you need to stay in a certain lane. So come out of your lane, feel confident in that. And there are so many great places out there where you can connect with people who are like-minded. And I think together we really can revolutionize the way that we see nursing education and the outcomes that these new nurses are getting. So that would probably be it.
Thank you so much, Leila, for joining me today and introducing us to your amazing new venture, or should I say adventure? We've been speaking today with Dr. Leila Castile, CEO and founder of the SyncSim Virtual Simulation Center. Listeners can learn more about what Leila and her amazing team are doing to impact student experiences, clinical capacity, and patient outcomes by visiting the SyncSim website at www.syncsim.com. That's SYNCSIM.com. Thanks for listening to the show today. Be well.